When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does online business better than Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/income.
Dona do lar? Eu sou dona de mim.
Se eu nasci pra casar? Não, eu nasci pra brilhar. Este é o lembrete de L'Oréal Paris para que você nunca se esqueça do seu próprio valor. Porque a sua história é valiosa. Porque você vale muito.
This content may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion advised.
Hello, and welcome to our very first episode of this all-new Patreon-exclusive show. Here, we'll tell you the stories of those long forgotten, whose sudden demise are as tragic as they are intriguing. These stories have laid dormant for decades, the mystery of their crimes often unfinished. This is In Cold Pursuit. If you like this new show format, be sure to subscribe to the Disturbed True Horror Patreon, where you can vote on future releases and help pick the best stories week to week. Without further ado, our first case. Yvonne Menke and Mary Jo Bailey. On December 12th, 1985, 45-year-old Yvonne Menke was walking down the stairs of her Wisconsin apartment building to head out to her car when she was shot 3 times in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. Her daughter Julie heard the gunshots and rushed through their apartment, from window to window, until she finally saw a figure in gray walking through the alleyway, glancing over their shoulder towards the scene of the crime. It didn't take long for the police to arrive at the scene. They found small boot prints in the snow next to Yvonne's body, which displayed the word Arctic on the heels. Just a couple of days before this tragic event, Julie had received a call in the morning asking if her mother was home. She said no, and the female caller asked what time her mother went to work. The girl said about 6:45 a.m. Before she could ask who was calling, the caller hung up the phone. This was not the first time Yvonne's residence had received strange calls from an unknown woman. After interviewing Yvonne's friends and family, it wasn't long before the names Mary Jo Lunsman and Jack Owen came up. Yvonne had been romantically involved with Jack on and off for years, but so had Mary Jo. This years-long love triangle had caused conflict between Yvonne and Mary Jo. Naturally, this led people to wonder if Mary Jo might be responsible for Yvonne's death. When police interviewed Jack, he revealed that Yvonne had attended his birthday party the night before her death. Mary Jo was not invited. However, according to Mary Jo, Jack had visited her at her house the night before the party. Mary Jo and Jack bonded over their love of horses and horse shows, and they attended many horse shows together. An unnamed woman known as Witness 5 told police that while she was stalling her horse at Jack's residence, someone cut the horse's tail and mane short which ruined the horse's chances at competing that season. Witness 5 did not know who did this, but thought it might have been Mary Jo. More importantly, she thought Mary Jo was capable of killing Yvonne, noting that she was knowledgeable about guns. When police interviewed Mary Jo, they learned that she owned both a .22 caliber pistol and a .22 caliber rifle, the latter of which she claimed not to know how to use. Police also requested she show them her shoes, and among them was a pair of Arctic Cat boots, size 5. These boots were sent to the lab and compared to the casts made of the boot prints found on the day of the murder. They were a match. Police also questioned Mary Jo's ex-husband, Lavin Lunsman. Lavin explained that he and Mary Jo used to go target shooting together and that she regularly used a .22 rifle or .22 pistol. Lavin's statement went against Mary Jo's own statement that she didn't know how to work a rifle. Lavin also revealed that while he and Mary Jo were still married, Jack Owen's then wife came up to him and told him that Jack and Mary Jo were having an affair. Lavin confronted Mary Jo, who said she would stop seeing Jack, but after the Lunsmans' divorce in 1980, she went back to spending time with Jack again. Although all signs seemed to point to Mary Jo, law enforcement did not find enough solid evidence to charge her with the crime. And so the case remained cold for nearly 40 years. Then, in 2021, law enforcement reopened the investigation, interviewing family, persons of interest, and many witnesses, some of whom had not been interviewed before. One of Mary Jo's friends, Witness 1, said there was something about this case that had bothered her for years. Not too long after the murder, a man who had dated Mary Jo told Witness 1 that he had burned some clothes per Mary Jo's request. Witness 1 also recalled that when she learned of Yvonne's death, she called Mary Jo, who did not sound especially shocked by the news. All these years later, she now believes that Mary Jo was responsible. In 2023, Witness 1 received a call from Mary Jo, who whispered to her that investigators were at her house. She asked Witness 1 if they had interviewed her yet and instructed her to claim not to remember the details. This call surprised Witness 1, as Mary Jo had not spoken to her in 2 years. She reported the unexpected conversation to investigators. Police interviewed one of Yvonne's daughters, known as Victim 2, for privacy's sake. And she recollected an evening when she was at her mother's apartment, and there was a knock at the door. Yvonne answered the door, had a brief conversation which only lasted a couple of minutes, and then returned. Victim 2 asked who was at the door, and Yvonne said it was Mary Jo. Victim 2 recalled that it was clear Yvonne disliked Mary Jo and did not want her there. This encounter happened not long before her murder. For whatever reason, this information had not come out during the original investigation, but it had bothered Victim 2 for years. Police also interviewed Yvonne's daughter, Julie, who lived with her at the time of the murder. Julie described Yvonne as being kind, loved by many, and quick to help those who needed it. Julie's friends even called her Mom. She didn't know of her mother having any enemies. Finally, police met with Yvonne's oldest daughter, Victim 3. Victim 3 confirmed that Yvonne had told her about Mary Jo's unexpected visit to her apartment and that it had bothered her at the time. Yvonne had spoken about Mary Jo many times, and Victim 3 knew they disliked each other. But her mild-mannered mother was not one to seek confrontation. Lieutenant Vitalis, who led the new investigation, was re-examining documents from 1985 when he came across a note that had been found in Yvonne's purse. on the day of her death. Written on the paper in Yvonne's handwriting was a license plate number, the phrase "touch of class," and the initials MJL. Turned out that touch of class was written on the brush guard of Mary Jo's truck at the time of the homicide. Advances in lab technology made it clear that Mary Jo's Arctic Cat boots did indeed make the prints found in the snow. Not only did they match the brand and shoe size, but they also matched the tread and wear pattern, ruling out the possibility that someone else with the same type of shoe had committed the murder. This damning evidence was the final nail in the coffin. At age 81, Mary Jo was found guilty of first-degree murder. She showed no remorse. Although she evaded justice for over 35 years, she will now live out her remaining years in prison. Melissa Highsmith. Melissa Highsmith was a bright and cheerful 21-month-old toddler when she vanished on August 23, 1971, in Fort Worth, Texas. In the decades since, the search for Melissa has captivated the public's attention and left a trail of unanswered questions and speculation. Melissa's mother, Alta Highsmith, was a young, single parent grappling with the challenges of raising a child alone. She had been separated from Melissa's father since the day Melissa was born and lived with a roommate in a small Fort Worth apartment. Life was hard for Alta as she tried her best to provide for her young daughter. Her job as a waitress at a nearby restaurant provided very little time off, and she often relied on the generosity of her friends to care for young Melissa while she was working. Favors from those close to her quickly ran out, though, and Alta was urged to place an ad in the local paper, asking for a caretaker for the toddler. Soon after its placement, she received a call from a woman who said her name was Ruth Johnson. Ruth agreed to meet Alta at the restaurant where she worked, in advance of taking care of her daughter. Ruth never came to the restaurant, however. A couple days later, she placed a late-night call to Alta pleading for the job, saying that she had a nice big yard and cared for other children there. Desperate for the help, Alta agreed to let Ruth watch young Melissa. On that fateful day, Alta was asleep when her roommate answered the door in the early morning. Her roommate described the woman at the door as dressed strangely, wearing a bright white dress and white gloves, with a scarf wrapped around her head and neck, despite the Texan heat. The woman identified herself and said simply, "I've come to pick up the baby." Little Melissa, dressed in a pink dress and white sandals, was handed to the woman. Later that evening, Alta returned from work to a disturbing reality. The babysitter had never returned, and Melissa was nowhere to be found. Her apartment, typically filled with the giggles of her happy toddler, was hauntingly silent. Alta waited until that night, but after hearing nothing from the babysitter, she called the police, who set out on a statewide search to find the child. Officers went door to door throughout her neighborhood, rallying community members to help find the missing girl, and the local television and print news covered the case extensively. The missing person poster of Melissa was impossible to miss in Fort Worth that summer. It hung in every window and on every telephone pole. The police were immediately faced with hurdles in their investigation. To start, there was nobody named Ruth Johnson anywhere near Fort Worth, Texas, and the number used to call Alta's home was a payphone at a nearby park. Despite intense efforts to gain identifiers on the woman in question, a physical description other than the roommate's was never found. Her whereabouts were linked only to a car with a loud muffler driving through the neighborhood that morning. Just 2 months after her abduction, Melissa's case was getting cold fast. In a desperate attempt to find her daughter, Alta published an open letter and a picture of herself in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Her message was heart-wrenching. "I would forget about your kidnapping Melissa in a minute if you would just bring her back. I don't understand why all this has happened to me, but the sooner Melissa is back, the better. I'm begging and pleading with you for my baby. Please read this and understand what you've done is wrong, and know that you must return Melissa to her mother. We can arrange for you to send the baby back to me without anyone knowing. I beg of you to call me." Her desperate plea fell on deaf ears, however. Despite front pages and evening television segments, no additional information was found in Melissa Highsmith's disappearance case. Throughout the years, the story came in and out of the spotlight. In 1988, Melissa's case gained national attention when it was featured on the television show Unsolved Mysteries. The episode included interviews with Alta Highsmith, who spoke movingly about her loss and the ongoing search for her daughter. The episode also featured reconstructions of the events leading up to Melissa's disappearance, providing viewers with a visual sense of the case. Despite the renewed attention, however, the episode did not lead to any significant developments in the investigation. In the early 2000s, a new turn of events added another layer of complexity and distress to Melissa's case. A woman came forward claiming to be Melissa. This woman, who had lived under the name Melissa Highsmith her entire life, asserted that she had been adopted and was, in fact, the missing child. The woman's story, while compelling, was met with skepticism. DNA tests were conducted to determine whether she could be the missing Melissa Highsmith. The results were inconclusive. While the woman resembled Melissa's family, the DNA did not provide a definitive match. The inconclusive results added to the already complex and painful situation. The possibility that the woman could be Melissa was tantalizing, but remained unconfirmed. The Highsmith family was left grappling with a layer of uncertainty, and the mystery of Melissa's fate continued to loom large. That was until the family appeared on the Vanished podcast. From their involvement with the show, they were put in touch with a DNA analyst who encouraged them to submit their genetic information to the 23andMe service. The results came back with positive matches. 3 biological grandchildren whose mother had to be Melissa. In 2022, after 51 years, Melissa was finally reunited with her mother after DNA results confirmed that she was Alta's daughter. The woman, then known as Melanie Brown, wasn't sure it was her at first, but after comparing baby pictures, was certain that she was Alta's missing daughter. All her life, Melissa was under the impression that the woman who raised her was her biological mother. She was abused and neglected. She was even told that her father was a Japanese man to justify the difference in appearance between her and her mother. At age 15, she ran away from home, working the streets to survive, as she said. After she learned her true identity, she reached out on Facebook to the woman who raised her. This woman claimed that she bought Melissa for $500, but Melissa believes that she, in fact, was the one who abducted her. The statute of limitations on this crime unfortunately expired decades ago, but the Fort Worth Police Department is still investigating the abduction. In 2023, Melanie Brown underwent the legal process to restore her name to Melissa Highsmith, formally reuniting with the family she had missed all these years. Though her abductors were never arrested, Melissa and her family are overjoyed to be together after over 5 decades of separation. Their story has given hope to many other families with missing relatives. Shelby Stotts and Angel Baby Doe. On November 18th, 2001, a man was cleaning up trash on the side of the road in Texas. when he made a devastating discovery: a newborn infant wrapped in a jacket, abandoned in a ditch. The baby girl's umbilical cord was still attached, but it had not been clamped, so she had bled to death. Evidence indicated that the child had been born alive, not a stillbirth, and that she had died shortly before being found. The unnamed baby was known as Angel Baby Doe. Law enforcement carried out a thorough investigation, interviewing many people and taking many DNA samples, but they were unable to find the girl's mother. 20 years later, Angel Baby Doe's DNA was sent to Othram, a groundbreaking forensics lab founded in 2018 that has identified perpetrators in multiple cold cases using forensic genealogy. Despite the DNA being contaminated and very difficult to analyze, Othram successfully built a profile for Angel Baby Doe. Through their research, they were finally able to determine her mother, Shelby Stotts. In July of 2024, Stotts was arrested and has been charged with second-degree manslaughter. She will be prosecuted under the laws that stood in 2001. Dr. Kristen Mittelman, Chief Development Officer of Othram, spoke about how Angel Baby Doe's case fits within Othram's mission to seek justice for victims. Baby Doe's murdered children, there's no one to advocate for that because the victim is usually murdered by the people that would have advocated for them. And so that case is just cold. I couldn't be more proud and thrilled to be a part of giving this baby her name back and being able to help get justice for her. Texas has a safe haven law that allows parents unable to care for their infant to bring a baby to any fire station, hospital, or EMS station in Texas. They can surrender the baby with no questions asked, and they will not be charged with abandonment. The child will be provided with any medical attention needed. Sadly, Shelby Stotts chose not to seek safe haven for her newborn, instead leaving her out in the elements to die of blood loss. 23 years later, her crime has finally caught up with her. Lady of the Dunes, Ruth Marie Terry. In July of 1974, 9-year-old Sandra Lee was camping with her parents in Provincetown, Massachusetts, when she decided to run away with her dog. Sandra's family was physically and verbally abusive, and the little girl had had enough. As she was making her way across the Race Point Dunes, her dog started barking and led her to a horrific discovery: a dead woman lying face down, her hands cut off, and head partially crushed and nearly severed. The body was decomposing and may have been lying there undiscovered for 2 weeks. Police discovered that some of her teeth had been removed, and it appeared she had been sexually assaulted after her death. A thorough investigation was carried out, but police were unable to identify the woman, who became known as the Lady of the Dunes. Her body was exhumed 3 times in 1980, 2000, and 2013. Finally, in 2022, skeletal remains were sent to Othram. Though the DNA was contaminated and degraded, using their forensic-grade genome sequencing, Othram was eventually able to identify the Lady of the Dunes. The oldest unidentified murder victim in the state of Massachusetts finally had a name: Ruth Marie Terry. Although investigators had previously speculated that killers Whitey Bulger, Tony Costa, or Haddon Clark might have been responsible, Ruth's identification led them to zero in on a new suspect: Guy Moldavin. Ruth had married Guy mere months before her death, and she was not his first wife. In fact, she was his 4th. After she was killed, Guy told Ruth's family that he and Ruth had fought and that he didn't know where she was. He ended up marrying a 5th woman and passed away in 2002. 20 years before Ruth's identification. Ruth was not the first person Guy was suspected of killing. In 1960, his second wife, Manzanita Ryan, and her 18-year-old daughter, Dolores Mearns, disappeared in Seattle. Guy was the prime suspect and fled. When police searched his home, they found human remains in his septic tank. Guy was caught by the FBI and charged with unlawful flight, but was never charged with the double homicide, as the county prosecutor apparently did not believe there was enough evidence. The unlawful flight charge was dropped, but it wasn't long before he was charged with larceny for stealing $10,000 from his third wife, Evelyn's family. Although he was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison, the judge suspended his sentence on the condition that he repay the stolen money. If he had served his sentence, Guy would have been imprisoned until 1975 and wouldn't have had the opportunity to kill Ruth. In 2023, Guy Moldavan was officially named Ruth Terry's murderer, and the case was closed. Moldavan managed to evade justice for his crimes, yet Ruth's family, Massachusetts state law enforcement, and the city of Provincetown are relieved to finally have answers to the mystery that plagued them for nearly 50 years. And let's not forget the little girl who found Ruth's body in the first place. Sandra Lee's discovery of the Lady of the Dunes was a critical moment in her life. She realized that if she did not find a way to get out of her abusive family dynamic, she might end up dead as well. The realization spurred her to seek help from her grandparents, who took Sandra and her brother into their home and cared for them from then on. As an adult, Sandra offered her respects for Ruth, saying, "I felt that I've owed her a debt of gratitude ever since that day." This has been In Cold Pursuit, a production of the Disturbed True Horror team at Killer Podcasts. If you liked what you heard, let us know, and we'll be sure to include it in the Patreon content coming your way. I'm your host, Doug Bailey. Remember, listeners, stay safe out there.
Hi, I'm Grace, host of Red Rum True Crime Podcast. These cases focus on the true victims of crime. Why not jump in at episode 114, the tragic murder of Jasmine and Aaliyah? The main suspect in this case gave an extremely bizarre interview to a number of press reporters whilst he was drunk and reportedly high. He speaks about an awful lot on camera and has this completely inappropriate laughing and chuckling response when talking about the case. He may even have thought he was gonna get away with the double murder he'd been accused of, but what he didn't know was that 2 undercover officers were on their way to catch him out, and he easily and willingly took the bait. You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Red Rum True Crime. That's Red Rum, murder backwards, REDRUM True Crime.